All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Channel Jewish History Author Interview Podcast. We're here tonight with Reb Dovid Leitner, who wrote a very interesting book, which he's going to talk about real soon. First of all, let me welcome you and thank you for joining me for this interview. I guess it's good evening by you, right? We're talking to you coming in from London. Tell us a little bit about your book called Marienbad and Beyond that you recently authored. Tell us briefly about when you wrote, what the book is about, brief, and what made you write it.
My father and grandfather and great-grandfather lived in Marienbad, and they opened a kosher hotel in this spa city of Marienbad, which grew from the 1850s onwards, and they were there till 1938 when they were evacuated by the Germans' occupation. They had a large hotel which they built an extension to in 1910. They had over 60 bedrooms, which at that time had hot and cold water in all the bedrooms. They had spa. Marienbad itself is on the German border of Czechoslovakia, and it's very well linked with trains and roads, and it attracted the affluent Jewish people from the West and the East. They all met there for many weeks of the summer months. It's a very picturesque town, which is completely clean of any pornography or any, even today, you can walk with your eyes open, plenty hills and plenty mountain walks around the city. But the main town is basically one large road, which is occupied with hotels on either side. And the people used to come there for sometimes 6 to 8 weeks at a time. You should go to have a drink of the spa water and then go for walks. That was part of the cure. And a lot of the Hasidic Rebbes used to come there for a long time, for 6 to 8 weeks. And in 1937, it was chosen by Rabbi Yaakov Rosenheim of the Aguda to host the Knesset Gedola just before the war. Because my grandfather and my great-grandfather had this hotel, I went back to Marienbad on my 70th birthday. I took all my 12 children there, and we met there overnight. We went to the hotel, we went to the Beis HaKvoros, and we went to the actual hall where the Knesset was held, and they treated us with a lot of respect. And from that, I spent another year and a half researching the background of Marienbad and collected many photos and wrote the book. My father had to escape with half an hour's notice in 19 September 1938 on a tip-off from the Czech police that the Germans were about to annex Czechoslovakia, and they drove to Prague, and from there he escaped to Poland. So he took very little with him of photos. Everything I had was collected from different sources. And because he was involved in a lot of communal work, my mother was his first cousin. They were engaged before the war. And when the war broke out, they were engaged. My mother lived in Bad Gastein in Austria. They also had a large kosher hotel. And my mother escaped to South America, and my father escaped to London, where he spent the war years working for the Aguda with a relief operation for Dr. Schoenfeld with the kinder transport.
Right. Thank you for that. I don't want to dwell too much, go cover the whole story just yet. That gives I think our viewers a pretty good understanding about what the book is about. Before I ask you anything else, I want to just give like a basic overview or description of some of the terms that we're using and some of the people that we're describing that some of my viewers may not be so familiar with. the Agudath Israel was an organization founded in Germany, I believe, but most of its members were Polish Jews. It was probably the largest Orthodox Jewish organization. It was founded in the interwar period. And most of the Rabbanim most of the rabbis of Lithuania and Poland were members of this organization. They used to get together at conferences every several years. And one of the famous ones was the one right before the Holocaust, which took place, as you say, at your father's spa. Your father owned this spa and hotel in Marienbad in which was then Czechoslovakia. And all the different rabbis from all over Eastern Europe came together. But it was a vacation spot for the Orthodox Jews in general, probably more prominent Orthodox Jews. I don't think people who were of means, I guess, came to vacation and take advantage of the amenities.
Marienbad actually was a central place where even Reformed Jews came for holidays. Marienbad and Karlsbad were another resort place, and the majority were actually Reformed. The synagogue in Marienbad was big enough to host about 400 men, but it was run by the Reform. The rabbi in Marienbad was a Reform rabbi. So although it was only open during the summer months for about 150 days a year. During the winter, the whole place shuts down basically, apart from the post office. There's nothing much you can do there. It's a summer resort.
So it's kind of like today people like the Catskill Mountains in upstate New York, where Haredi Jews flock during the summer, but during the winter, it's pretty much nothing going on. It's kind of, I guess that would be a good analogy, somewhat. But there was a small Orthodox Jewish community year-round in Marienbad, aside from your family, correct? Was there a mini?
There were about 72 Jewish houses in Marienbad in 1938, which were annexed by the Germans. There's a record of 72 actually people living in different houses. The Leitners were prominent there. My father had an uncle who had a hotel next door, and his hotel was slightly bigger than ours, but they worked in unison together.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
They worked in unison together. The reason why the Hasidic and all the Rebbes came, even German Rabbanim used to come there for holidays, because they felt there they could relax. Some of them needed the cure, a lot of them needed the cures. And in Rabbi Chanan Wasserman, who wasn't Hasidic at all, he came every year for quite extended period of time. In fact, in 1935, when his wife died, he was there for 6 weeks because he needed treatment. And he took the spa water. And because it was a meeting point, a lot of people didn't have to travel. They could come to Marienbad and know they'll meet a lot of people which they couldn't meet otherwise. Don't forget, in those days, there was no internet, no telephones, or very few connections that way. And people actually physically traveled there to meet.
So yeah, it was an amazing, it must have been an amazing cacophony of different accents of Yiddish, different styles of clothing.
That's right.
Different ideologies. And as you point out in the book, someone mentioned what a Kiddush Hashem was, that a certain Gentile observer said, I've never seen anything like this, where people who look so different and come from completely different countries come together and they greet each other with such smiles and friendliness and amity. You recall that passage in the book, right?
Yes, that was a positive part that was recorded in the newspaper, Kinnesia, by David Turkle, who wrote the article, that he actually heard this remark made by a non-Jew on the road. But by 1937, the Agudas Yisrael was actually an international organization. I mean, the Blazer Silver came from Cincinnati with a large delegation from America because he was a student of Rabbi Godzinski of Vilna, and he asked him to come to the Knesset. And with foresight, if not for him, the Agudas Yisrael in America wouldn't exist today. The war broke out soon afterwards, and he set it up basically. But the people came from Stockholm, from Yugoslavia, from all over the world, even from Africa. There were some delegations that came from Denmark. It wasn't just Hasidic people. I mean, the main rabbi at the Knesset was the Ger Rebbe, and he came from Poland, and therefore a lot of the followers were Hasidic people. But the speakers at the Knesset were mainly German Rabbonim who led the show.
What was life growing up for your parents, for your father, let's say? Obviously you were born in Chile and came over as a young child to England. So you wouldn't know, and you didn't actually grow up in Marienbad, but your father did. What was life like? For instance, your family was Ashkenaz, right? German Jews, what they call Yekis, correct?
Yeah, my father was a Yekker at heart, yeah, but because of the import of the Hasidic Rebbe in the hotel, and for instance, the brother Rebbe, Shlomo Halberstam, with his father, escaped there during the First World War, and he stayed in the hotel for quite a few months.
Yes.
And he was the same age as my father, and they played together as children. So they had a close contact. And the Belzer Rebbe had he stayed in the hotel, and he usually occupied 18 bedrooms with all his. So a third of the hotel was taken up by Bells, and they stayed for 6 to 8 weeks. So they were quite good customers, so to speak, and they had quite a lot of connection.
So it was interesting. I always love to see this kind of clash, this culture clash, where I guess a Yeki person comes in contact with a Galiciano Rebbe, and like the different mentalities. Like you mentioned in the book, I found that humorous, the passage where your father was really not doing well in the business, and it looked like he was going to have to file for bankruptcy, and someone told him to go see the Rebbe, the Belzer Rebbe, and he said, "Why? Can you give me a loan? Like, what's the point of seeing the Belzer Rebbe, right?" And then he gave him a blessing, and then everything turned around. It's pretty. And then it looks like your father was sort of a Yeki chassid of Belzer Rebbe until
he became, from those experiences, he saw the power of the Rebbes. They weren't just good business customers. They had some.
Did your father?
Yeah.
Did your father grow up speaking a dialect of German or Yiddish or both? Just curious.
He spoke German at home. In Czechoslovakia, they spoke German and Czech, of course, right? And when he went to South America, he had to speak Spanish, because he was there for a good 10 years. He ran a business. He learned Spanish. But when we came to England in 1955, we had to learn English to be able to go to school. So the headmistress advised my parents to stop speaking German at home and to stop speaking Spanish at home, only times that we should learn English. So when they want to speak to themselves, between my father and my mother, they used to speak German between them. So we forgot the Spanish and we learned German in between instead. Mm-hmm. So my father he was quite, he knew Czech, he knew Spanish, he knew English, he knew Yiddish. He was quite international that way.
So, and when you growing up in England, you spoke mostly English, though, right? You and your siblings.
My native language was Spanish, from South America.
Oh, right.
I was 7.5 when I came, and we learned English, and that's basically my native tongue now. I mean, I don't know much Spanish anymore.
You forgot. I hear. Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, it's really the reason why your book is so poignant is it describes a period of time that kind of is frozen in time, like that period right before the Holocaust when no one expected anything like it to happen. And your father was one of the organizers of one of the largest gatherings of rabbis from all across Eastern Europe at his hotel on the Czech-German border. And it's just really poignant. I mean, I'm sure you're aware recently they unearthed some footage of the famous Chafetz Chaim, Rabbi Yisrael Meir Kagan of Radin, who arrived at the Aguda conference. That was that Aguda conference, I believe.
That was in Vienna, yeah, 1923.
That was the one in Vilna. Okay, so that was before this one. Marienbad was third. Right. Okay. He didn't actually attend the one in Marienbad, did he?
He wasn't alive anymore.
He wasn't alive. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I should have known that. Chafetz Chaim had already passed. Correct. Excuse me. So it's really interesting to see the documents and how you really were able to unearth all these different letters and clippings and ephemera, and it's really remarkable that you were able to save all these different little things that really tell a story and that kind of commemorate a world that's completely long gone and past. And then we get so that's interesting. So your parents, your father was an unmarried bachelor at the time while he was living there. He was a young man. How old was he when
he got married on his 40th birthday?
Right, he was already 40 years old when he got married. How old was he on the eve of World War II?
Huh?
On the eve of World War II.
He was born in 1906.
Okay, I get that. Okay, so he helped organize and
he was engaged for 8 years because the war broke out in between. And my mother was in South America, he was in London, on the other side of the world, and had no contact with each other. And after the war, he got permit to go on a merchant navy boat as priority to go to South America. They got married there. There was, I think, the uniqueness of the book. Although it's a story about the pre-Holocaust period, it's more on the positive side of what life was about, the beauty of Jewish life before the Holocaust. And apart from small passages about describing the family members who went through Theresienstadt, and one went to Shanghai, but Baruch Hashem, the family in general weren't suffering from the Holocaust. My father lost his father and his sister in the Holocaust, but everybody else escaped.
Yeah, that's also pretty remarkable how that happened. And just before I move on to the Chile part of the story, what kind of Jewish education and how did you come about it? Did he receive growing up?
Well, in Chile itself, in Santiago de Chile, the capital.
Before Chile.
Huh?
Before Chile, while still in Marienbad, what kind of Jewish education did your father receive?
Well,
in Marienbad.
In Marienbad, I didn't live in Marienbad. I was born in Chile.
Not you, your father. I'm talking about your father.
I think it was all private education. He went to the non-Jewish school in Marienbad. He had to by law. And then he went to commercial school. And there's a photo there with his class. And he graduated there at the age of 16. And in those days, people learned a trade. And he learned the hotel business, the management part of it, and the commercial part. But the Jewish education was from home, basically.
Right. There wasn't much too many options in a place like that. Okay, so the family, your father ends up in Chile during the war years, which is a very interesting story in of itself. And you and your siblings are born in Chile. He marries your mother. He was already 4 years old at the time. There was an 8-year or 10-year break between.
They were engaged for 8 years, yeah.
The 8-year break. He finally marries. He was already 40 years old, as you mentioned. And the family settles in Santiago de Chile, and he does various import-export businesses. And you and your siblings grow up there. And okay, so I can't help but mention something. So I get the sense that so you attended a school called Theodor Herzl School that you mentioned, right? There was the only Jewish school in Santiago.
There's only one school, yeah. The Zionist school, something like
Right.
King David, yeah.
I get the sense that you weren't such a big fan of that type of education.
Well,
That's the sense that I
we
get.
had no choice. We had to go somewhere. And at least the children were all Jewish, but they didn't keep anything. I mean, they didn't celebrate even Purim. It wasn't spoken about. They only spoke about the state of Israel and Herzl and Bialik. And in fact,
It was a real secular. It was a secular sort of left.
Yes, it
wing.
was very, very secular. Yeah. In fact, although we learned to read Hebrew, we never actually learned the Aleph base in the way they would teach it today in a school with the commas and the patach and all that. And it wasn't heard of, we just.
I have to ask, right. I have to ask you two things, if you don't mind. It's a little bit of a touchy subject, but do you think the Agudah today, or the Agudah that developed, the Agudah party that developed, has a lot in common with the Agudah that your father knew, or the Agudah pre-World War II, or it's a completely different animal, so to speak?
Well, when we came to England, the Agudah helped us as children, because we also went to non-Jewish schools. In Manchester, there was the primary schools were Jewish, but apart from that, the senior schools, once you were 11, they all went to Goyish schools. So the Agudah formed for the boys and the girls. They had groups every Shabbos and every Sunday. They went on outings. So we kept together in a very positive way. We had activities during the holidays, and in a big way. We had a summer camp, which were run by the Agudah, and that gave us a lot of impetus, which was a very positive feedback for our education. And what happens today with Agudah, I don't know, it's more political, but as far as I know.
Right, it became a more political part. But even before World War II, I'm interested in this. There was so many different. There was a sort of a range of opinions and ideological positions within members of the Agudah. For instance, you had the Sadiger Rebbe, who most people would describe him as pretty Zionist, and they would say on the right. And then you'd have Rabbi Chanan Wasserman and the Brisker. I don't know if the Brisker was a member of the Agudah, but Chanan Wasserman and Rabbi Dushinsky would be, let's say, people would call them. On the right, that would be very anti-Zionist. So is that a fair assessment? The Agudah kind of was sort of neutral on the question of Zionism.
You must remember that in 1937, the Nazis were getting stronger by the day, and the Jews wanted to get out, and nobody wanted them. Right? They had nowhere to go to.
The Evian conflict. Yeah.
The offer of Palestine at the time was a very positive possibility. But on the other hand, the Zionists had the upper hand, and they were trying to establish a state that would be the same as England or America without any Jewish values. I mean, even the government today are very watering down the Jewish values of what Eretz Yisrael should be. I mean, it should be Eretz Yisrael run by the Torah, and not a state like America or England, which is, without any morals, and they do what they want. There's no. That was
right. What about the Mizrahi Party, which was probably the second largest Orthodox consortium of rabbis and laymen in Eastern Europe? And it was, I guess, the competitor of Agudah among Eastern European masses, and perhaps even among Orthodox German Jews.
Well, the Agudah viewed the Mizrahi as a compromise between the Zionists and the Orthodox. So it was a watered down orthodoxy, or an Orthodox Zionist organization. So they were skeptical about their actual intentions, or what they were. If it came to the crunch, what would they decide? With the Zionists or with the Frummers? Will they keep Shabbos or not keep Shabbos? You know what I mean? That was the crux of the problem. But in 1937, it was very difficult for the Rabbanim to say, we're staying here were not taking Eretz Yisrael, because they were thrown out, basically. They were persecuted where they were, and they had no choice.
Correct. So I guess the atmosphere that you grew up with was a more a very traditional, I guess what we would call, it's an ethos that you don't really see anymore. And what I'm trying to explain, I'm trying to bring out is, and this brings me to Chile. In Chile, your father founded or became a member of what's called a Sam Sofer Shul, correct?
Well, the Soviet shul was there, but when he arrived, there was the people who built the shul weren't alive anymore. And he was, before the war, there were about 10,000 Jews in Santiago. And by the end of the war, there were 600,000 Jews, because Chile was about the only country that didn't ask questions. You want to come? Pleasure. Right? They let anybody in. But out of those 600,000 Jews, a lot of them, or the majority of them, were assimilated, married out. Right. So there might have been in the Orthodox community my father founded, there might have been 40, 50 Orthodox people who were interested in keeping Shabbos, and eventually they bought a shochet and a rob, and made their own minyan. And my father established a matzah bakery, which ran for 6 months a year. And
so, do you know who founded the Chassam Sofer? First of all, who founded the Orthodox community? Who was the rabbi, and who founded the Chassam Sofer minyan? Do you know the name of the rabbi?
The rabbi only came later. He came about 2 years before we left. He came in 1953, because the rabbi first have to establish yourself till you get people didn't have money to pay somebody's wages. You know what I mean? It was after the war, the economic situation was very, very scarce. Money was very scarce, and the Rav only came in 53. So the community was founded.
Are you talking about the Rav of the general Orthodox community, or the Rav of the Chassam Sofer minyan? Are they two different things, right?
No, it's the same thing.
Same thing. Okay, same thing. So and this Chassam Sofer minyan comprised of Orthodox Jews from a range of different backgrounds. Let's say all the way from Hasidic to Mizrahi.
No, there were no Hasidic Jews in South America. Not
there wasn't. Well, the Belzer Rebbe said. Didn't the Belzer Rebbe say there's a shochet who was a Belzer Chassid who lives in Chile?
No, there was Abram Tauber was a Hasidic Jew, but he was the only one. Right. He emigrated to London later.
Right, but it was a pretty diverse group of different type of. It was all they had in common. There was Shomer Torah mitzvahs.
When you got 50 people, you can't divide them into Orthodox and Hasidic, and we all sat around the same table and had the same aspirations to. If you can keep Shabbos and have a lulav and esrog to shake on Sukkot, you were happy.
That's the main thing.
Yeah, there was no.
You don't have the luxury like we do today.
No, there was no
rule on every block.
Yeah, no. My father had to pay for his lulav, for his esrog, about 9 months before Sukkot. You had to send money to Israel to they should post it in time for Sukkot.
Wow.
You couldn't get it locally. Today you pick up as many as you want. You have a choice. There was no such thing. You got what you were sent, and that was it.
Yeah, people don't appreciate how lucky, I guess, and spoiled we are that we have the amenities, all the Jewish amenities, kosher restaurants, Judaica stores, Svarim, book. I mean, everything we want. You don't even have to leave your couch, and you can just read every sefer on your computer. You can order in just about everything from the comfort of your own home. It was a little harder not too long ago, right? You have to make a little bit of effort sometimes to get kosher food or to get things like esrog and lulav.
That's right.
Yeah.
And they lived basically with the kids of Shulchan Aruch. That's the only sefer they had, with the German translation. And that's
interesting.
Their guideline.
That's interesting. So the Kitzer was authored by Shlomo Gansfried, who was a Hungarian Ashkenaz Jew.
Yeah.
Right? Ahmed Chassam Sofer.
He lived at the same time as Chassam Sofer, yeah.
Right. And your family kind of went with the Kitzer Shulchan Aruch. That was the go-to halachic guide.
Yeah, that's what the people used in those days. Didn't have a library.
Right, right. Because he is sometimes stringent on many things that say that the Mishnah Berurah, for instance, is more lenient on, or let's say the Mishnah Berurah is more common, I guess, today among Orthodox Jews. Right, it's more of the go-to halachic guide. But I guess things were a little different back then, also depending on your Masorah, your background.
Well, Mishnah Berurah only covers Orach Chaim. The Kitzur Shulchan Aruch covers all 4 sections of Shulchan Aruch in one volume, right? It takes everything you need to know throughout your life, right? From birth to death, everything's in there. In short, but all the essential things that you need to know to lead a Jewish life was put in the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. And I think, looking back, it was the divine providence that before the 2 world wars, that such a kitzur was available, that people who went into exile without any notice, they could put a kitzur Shulchan Aruch into their briefcase without having to schlep 6 volumes of Shulchan Aruch with them. They had everything they needed on the fingertips.
Right, right. Was your family from that area of Czechoslovakia for generations?
The first record we have was going back to the beginning of the 18th century. They didn't live in Marienbad, they lived about 5 miles further north in a small town called Drummel, which was destroyed by the Germans in 1938. And all that's left there is a few tombstones.
Did your father? That's interesting. So that would be Bohemia, Moravia, right? That would be historic Bohemia, that region? Historic Bohemia?
Bohemia, yes.
Yeah, okay. Did your father have anything to do with the Rab Breuer's Kehillah?
But Breuer's Kehillah was in Germany.
Yeah, I'm saying when they relocated to the United States, and there probably some in London as well, I'm guessing.
He was only in New York for 10 days on his journey from England to South America.
Right.
I mean, America's a big place. It's in the same area of the world, but it's
yeah.
I mean, from North America to South America, it's as far from here to Israel.
Correct.
In distances.
It's a huge amount of distance. Was there, I guess, so-called Yeki community when your family settled in Manchester?
Yes, well, we came to Manchester in 1955. The Masik Das, which is a thriving community today, was in its formation stage. And because there were a lot of Hasidic Jews who davened Svad, and also a lot of German Jews who belonged to the same shul, they decided, for sake of peace, to separate the 2 minyanim together. And one should daven Ashkenaz, and one should daven Svad, and make 2 minyanim, but they all belong to the same community. So the Das Yisrael was founded with the consent of Masik Das, and they actually ran the Masik Das Chevra Kadisha. So they were associated together. They weren't 2 separate things, but one daven Ashkenaz, one daven Svad, and that still carries on today.
That's interesting. That's really interesting. I guess we covered most of what I wanted to cover. If you want to add anything else in terms of the story, I mean, it's a fascinating story. I'm sure you've read the other book on Marienbad and the spa towns, and I think the 2 other books on this. But this is unique. Your book is unique in that it's a part memoir, it's a part family memoir, and also a historical documentation of this phenomenon. And to this day, it's interesting. You still have Rabbanim who go to places like Switzerland. They go to, I don't know if does anyone still go to places like spas, hot springs, baths, mineral salt water? Is that still a thing today? I don't know.
I've been to Marienbad a few times. I've never met anybody goes for a few months, a few weeks because he needs treatment. If he needs treatment in a spa, he'll either go to Tiberias or something like that, where he can have his kosher food and no problem.
Right. That's C, yeah.
although they're not antagonistic to the Jews. I mean, they're very welcoming and all the rest of it, even today.
Yeah. The Czechs have always, I guess, last couple of hundred years have been pretty tolerant and maybe even philo-Semitic, as some would call
Yeah.
some the Czechs, unlike the Slovaks. Perhaps.
That's right. They wouldn't mind them back, in fact, because they wouldn't go back because there's no infrastructure.
Right. Very fascinating story, very fascinating book. Highly recommended. It's called Marienbad and Beyond, and we're talking with the author of that book, Reb Dovid Leitner, who is in Manchester or London. I'm sorry.
Manchester.
Yeah. Manchester, England. We really thank you for taking the time out.
It's available on Amazon.
Thank you so much for discussing the book
Thank
with
you
me.
very much.
And we hope that you can purchase this book online.
On Amazon, yeah.
On Amazon.com. It's called Marienbad and Beyond by Dovid Leitner, Leitner. And I want to thank you again so much for
thank you.
Us. If you press the stop record button.
Shalom Aleichem. Shalom Aleichem.
I just want to make sure that you don't lose the recording because I had a problem. It's okay.
I'm just calling my grandson too.
That's fine.
I'm a bit old-fashioned with these things. You stop the recording.
Yeah. I also not great at tech. You could just press stop recording.